You're listening to the Untaming Podcast.
We rail that child.
Here is your host, Emily.
Hello and welcome. Thanks for listening to this very first episode of the Untaming Podcast. Mum and Dad, my sisters, and my husband. If I have less than 5 followers, I have you to blame. You brought it upon yourselves by encouraging me to do this. If I have more than 5 listeners, wow, hello. And I'll give you a quick rundown on me. I was born in and grew up in Christchurch, New Zealand, but I have barely lived there since I was 17. I have lived in Canada, Germany, am currently living in Portugal, and I've travelled to, I think it's 42 other countries. So I apologise if this accent is difficult to understand. I earned my degree in psychology by correspondence from Massey University. My minor papers were in child development and education. But that's just my pious-sounding hoity-toity formal education. I have learnt more informally than I ever did in structured education. For anyone familiar with Malcolm Gladwell's 2008 book, Outliers, you will know of his 10,000 hours theory. It was my personal goal to attain 10,000 hours of working with children before I had my own children. Spoiler alert, I met this goal. I worked as a teacher in an international school, as a mental health support worker for teenage and adult patients who needed respite care, but most of my working life was spent as both a live-in nanny and a live-out nanny, not at the same time, for 2 separate families, one with 5 children, the other with 4. Those children were fundamental in cultivating my passion for all things child-related. I developed such close relationships with them over my years with the families that by the time my first child was born, he felt more like my 10th child in terms of not having to suffer from that feeling of utter cluelessness. I met my husband in our final year of high school. We have been together 11 years, married for 4. We have done a lot of travelling together. We lived in a van for 2 years, then in a caravan for 3 years, and have been living off the grid in rural Portugal for nearly 4 years now. We have a 3-year-old and a 7-month-old. They are the driving force behind this continued pet passion of mine. Their existence motivates me to continue learning, to improve myself and understand them better. Today, the 31st of May, is my 30th birthday. So I wanted to mark the occasion by launching this podcast. I never want to be that righteous, preachy parent who lectures new parents on this or that. And I also don't want to bore others with these topics which I could drone on about endlessly. So I decided to create this podcast as an outlet to share my passion for meeting the biological needs of children or rewilding children. I hope it is both interesting and informative. Next week, I will be talking with botanical researcher Arthur Haynes about the widespread physical degeneration of civilized society brought about by our domesticated diet. Other episodes in this podcast will focus on topics such as natural human movement, early infant memories, climate change, birth, breastfeeding, permaculture, sun exposure, dental health, education, neurogenesis, nature deficit disorder, and the microbiome, and many others. However, if you only ever listen to one episode of this podcast, make it today's interview with neuroscience researcher Doctor Darcia Narvaez. She talks about the human evolved nest, and I'm sure it will be shocking to many listeners just how far civilization has strayed from meeting the absolutely basic biological needs of its children. Her no-nonsense wisdom is admirable, and I'm envious of Darcia's students at Notre Dame University for having such a brilliant mentor in their lives. At the end of this episode, we briefly discuss her newest book, which has been released since this recording. The full title is Indigenous Sustainable Wisdom, First Nation Know-How for Global Flourishing. I haven't read it yet, but I intend to, as it sounds like a valuable resource. We had some minor audio issues with this recording, so a couple of parts had to be re-recorded to help maintain the flow of the conversation. Hopefully it isn't noticeable, but I apologize in advance if it is. Award-winning neuroscience researcher Doctor Darcia Narvaez was born in Minneapolis and spent part of her childhood in Puerto Rico, Mexico, Colombia and Spain. She currently lives in South Bend, Indiana with her husband Daniel. Her resume, publications and awards are so plentiful I could spend half of this episode simply listing them, so I hope to do her justice with this summary. Dr. Narvaez's prior careers include professional musician, classroom music teacher, business owner, seminarian, and middle school Spanish teacher. She is the author or editor of numerous books and articles. Her book, Neurobiology and the Development of Human Morality, Evolution, Culture and Wisdom, won the 2015 William James Book Award from the American Psychological Association, as well as the 2017 Expanded Reason Award. Dr. Narvaez writes the popular Moral Landscapes blog for Psychology Today. She is an advisory board member of Attachment Parenting International and the Association for Pre- and Perinatal Psychology and Health. Her insights have founded the nonprofit initiative The Evolved Nest, which is committed to restoring human nature by striving to create sustainable humans and therefore sustainable human systems. Dr. Narvaez hosts interdisciplinary conferences at the University of Notre Dame, where she is a professor of psychology. Her current research explores how early life experience influences societal culture, well-being, and socio-moral character in children and adults. She integrates neurobiological, clinical, developmental, and educational sciences in her theories and research about human nature and human development. Last night, she had 8 hours of sleep, and for lunch today, she had Thai food from the farmer's market. Darcia, it is my pleasure to welcome you to the show.
Thanks so much, Emily.
Before we start, I have something a bit embarrassing to admit. Maybe it's because I'm not from North America, but when we became friends on Facebook, I saw that you live in Indiana, and my first thought was, that's a long commute. I soon realized that the University of Notre Dame is not in Paris, France, like I had thought. I'd read Notre Dame and assumed it was French and filed it away as being in Paris.
Well, there are a few Notre Dame campuses around the world, so yes, this is the one in Indiana.
So to get us started, could you tell us what an evolved nest is in regards to mammals?
Yes, so every animal has a nest, and humans do too, and ours is very much like the social mammalian nest that emerged over 30 million years ago. So these are characteristics that helped our ancestors survive and thrive, and kept them going, essentially through multiple generations. And our nest is very similar, although it got more intense because as we evolved from using 4 limbs to get around to using 2 to walk on. And so then our pelvises had to shrink and babies had to be born even more immature than previously. And so our nest is particularly important for us because we're so immature. We look like fetuses till we're about 18 months of age. Our skull bones aren't fused until around that time, for example, and that means we are supposed to have our brain growing a lot. And the way you grow a brain is you provide the nest. All the kind of characteristics of the nest help that brain grow bigger. And we know that the size of growth, the amount of growth in the first year of life is linked to intelligence as it's been measured. So what's the nest? For us, the anthropologists have noted all over the world that the kind of society in which we spent 99% of our history, small band hunter-gatherers, have these same characteristics. They provide this same kind of nest to their young. And interestingly, they have similar adult personalities that are calm and generous and cooperative and all that. So what the nest then includes a soothing birth experience and perinatal kind of calmness and no traumatizing of the baby. This is also, it's not in the list of what the anthropologists give us, but it's part of the experience is having a calm gestational period so that mother is not traumatized during her pregnancy. She's not socially stressed. Physical stress is okay to work hard and that kind of thing, but to feel rejected or emotionally distressed is not good for the baby either. for either of them. And then at birth, you don't want to separate the mom and baby. You don't want to have any painful procedures. All that imprints the brain in ways that have long-term effects. You may not see them immediately. They might come out later in adolescence or even in adulthood, so like schizophrenia. So soothing birth experience.
So hospital births are really undisturbed. I don't just mean like cesareans, epidurals, and inductions, but augmentation, instruments, episiotomies, antibiotics, managed third stage, continuous monitoring, restriction of movement, and medical pain relief. It is extremely unlikely that a birth in a hospital will occur without at least one of these disturbances to the physiological process. So can you talk about how this disturbance could affect the baby in both the short and the long term, and if there's anything that can be done to rectify this after the fact?
Well, hospital births in the United States really only came into play significantly in the 20th century. Doctors wanted to have more control, and so they moved births to hospitals instead of going to people's homes. And of course, men came into birthing in the 1800s. Midwives used to do it all. So we've kind of shifted away from natural practices to these very controlling ways of bringing people into life, in part because we thought, and many doctors still think, that babies don't feel pain. That it doesn't matter what you do to a baby because they won't remember it, but their body remembers. And we know that now, but the practices continue. So these things are going to have immediate effects of increasing stress response. And if you have too long of a stress response as a baby, that means the cortisol is flowing at high levels. I mean, it's going to melt the synapses that are supposed to be growing at that time, which are thousands of synapses per minute, if not per second, are growing when a baby is in optimal kind of nest condition.
Wow.
So what are you undermining? I mean, that's the question. And every individual develops differently. We're all unique. And so you don't know really what you're affecting. But what happens is you create gaps then in brain development that may appear later. The brain tries to accommodate those gaps. But later on, as with schizophrenia, those gaps really become significant, and the brain can't cope anymore with alternatives. And so you have disruptions in normal behavior. So there's those short and long-term effects. You're undermining trust, the baby's trust in the world. You know, they don't feel safe. They're coming in like you're going to a party. You get to the door of the house and you feel like you're going to walk into a welcoming environment. Instead, you walk in and everyone's yelling at you and screaming at you and hitting you. You want to go back in that house? You'd run away if you could, right? So we're doing that to babies, and then we expect them to be normal, really?
Yeah.
Now kind of impress their whole body, self, spirit with a sense of unwelcome and distress and a lack of safety. I mean, this is a dangerous place. You better shut down. Don't grow too fast, you know, and anything that was growing is just going to stop. Biochemistry is going to be different, and baby's just not going to grow in the way that's normal for our species.
Now, I've also heard you talk about birth having a 55-day variability in terms of, you know, not wanting to induce unless truly necessary. So, but what is the time frame there? Is that roughly weeks 37 through 45?
I guess so. I haven't calculated that.
All right. Yeah.
So yeah, babies have their own rate of development. Of course, it's going to matter what the mother's experiencing too, and how nurturing her environment is. But some babies need longer in the womb, and they want to stay there longer. That's okay, right? And so when doctors set a due date, it's a guess.
Right. Yeah. Of course.
Yes. Then there's responsiveness, which is part of this keeping babies calm and the right kind of biochemistry for their development. You want to keep them in optimal aroused state. So if they want to sleep, let them sleep. And if they are awake, then bring about joy. You know, and developmentally, it varies how you do that. You want to keep them happy because then they're more likely to develop a happy personality, a very agreeable kind of person, because they haven't been distressed and, you know, ignored or left alone. And so this responsiveness includes affection, which is the third one, which is keeping baby pretty much on your body as long as they want, 24/7 in those first months. And then the co-sleeping and bed sharing that our species expects throughout life.
Right, yeah. With a child going to bed, it's often seen as like cute when a child needs a favorite blanket or soft toy or some other cuddly thing to go to sleep at night. But is this something that occurs in nomadic foraging cultures, or is this
No.
a result of a child not having that caregiver to comfort them through the night?
Yes.
Right. Yeah.
You are right. That's a weird kind of substitution for, the body of mom or dad or aunt, uncle, grandma, grandpa, who should be there right there with that baby.
Mm.
So we are already now, you can tell that we've set up insecurity when you force a child to go to sleep in their own bed, in their own room. Well, they got to latch on to something,
Yeah, of course. A question has just popped into my head, bed sharing with children. Is there so obviously for the first 18 months, but is there an age where children should be kicked out of the bed, or obviously they still need that physical contact? So, but do you know if there's an upper age limit there?
Well, for a social mammal, we should be sleeping with someone throughout our lives. How's that for an answer?
Perfect, that's what I wanted. And in terms of responsiveness, I wanted to share a personal story here. For the first 2 months of my daughter's life, she would become uncomfortable and very upset, roughly once every hour during the day. I'd nurse her for comfort while also holding her bare bottom over a potty, and she would relax, go to the toilet, and then she was happy again.
Oh.
Now at nearly 6 months old, she really gets upset. She'll just fuss slightly and I'll squat down with her outside or over a potty and she'll go. In those first couple of months, it often made me think if I had her wearing a diaper during the day, I wouldn't know why she was getting upset. I would just be trying anything to comfort her, not realizing she was telling me she needed to go to the toilet. As humans, we didn't evolve to use diapers, so an infant's cues for when they need to relieve themselves seems to be a huge component of responsiveness that we're missing out on in our diaper-happy culture. Is this an example of responsiveness?
Yes, I think so. I haven't written about this, but I agree. Mammals don't like to be sitting in their poop.
No.
So we shouldn't be forcing it on babies. Think of that. Hours or, minutes.
Oh yeah, it's so uncomfortable. We wouldn't like that as adults.
Oh, no. So I think that is really important. And then if you're carrying the baby skin to skin, you'll know this. You'll learn the signals. That's our heritage.
Yeah.
And then it makes potty training so easy, right?
Oh yeah, yeah. In terms of nomadic foraging societies, how does the quickness in caregiver responsiveness change as a baby ages? Like I imagine it's instant when they're a baby, but as they get older into toddler age, is it still instant, or do they kind of leave them to figure it out on their own?
Yeah, it's. I'm not sure exactly what the time period is when they shift to being less responsive, but certainly they're very responsive in those first 18 months. And then once the child is walking around, they are giving it as much autonomy as possible and meeting its needs, her needs or his needs as they come up. But the baby is very trusting now and knows the needs will be met, so they don't get upset easily unless they're trying to climb a tree and they can't do it. But they let then the child figure it out on their own because they trust the inner spirit of that child to guide the child in development.
Right, yeah.
We talked about affection. Let me say a little bit more. So affection and responsiveness are going to set up the neurobiology of the child very well. So the vagus nerve is one key component of our health. It's the 10th cranial nerve that links to all the major systems of the body. And lack of responsiveness or affectionate touch, which is part of it, will lead to a set up vagus nerve or vagal tone, and so that leads to various health problems depending on, I guess, the timing of the lack of support. So you can have brain seizures, irritable bowel, heart problems, respiration problems, and then you'll have problems with intimacy. You won't be able to calm yourself down well enough to be intimate with, physically close to someone, because we need to be able to shut down or panic that wants to run away from being so close. So that's one of the things that affectionate touch can help provide. Another is the epigenetics for anxiety. We know from extensive research with rats and rat pups, and they have similar brain structures in regards to these factors. If you have a high nurturing rat mother in the first 10 days of life, she's going to be licking you a lot. Now for a human, the equivalent would be carrying a baby a lot in the first 6 months. It's the same time period in our development. So those first 10 days is equal to 6 months for us. If you have the high nurturing mother, she turns on then the genes that control anxiety. And she turns on tons of other genes too, but that's the one they focused on in Michael Meany's lab. If you have a low nurturing mother, whether it's your mother or some other mother, those genes never get turned on properly. And so for the rest of your life, you get anxious in new situations. And so you can control it with drugs. And so you could see, we can't do the experiments, but you can surmise that a lot of the distress that you read about in the United States and all the dysregulation and the inability to be open and welcoming is related to issues of the vagus nerve, issues of epigenetics of anxiety. We've got epidemics of anxiety and depression in the United States, and it's only getting worse.
Wow. So when people would say something like, oh, she's very insecure like her mother or her father, it's because of the epigenetics. It's not like learned behavior. It's results of their undercare.
Yeah, so epigenetics means you have a blueprint. You come into life with a blueprint of genes. That's one of our inheritances. We have many inheritances. Genes are the ones that people tend to focus on because it's so concrete and measurable. But the nest is another one of our inheritances. But the genes are just a blueprint. They're inactive. They have to be activated by experience. What kind of experience, right? So it matters which kind of experience activates which genes. And the timing matters, apparently, we're discovering.
Yeah.
Yes, so another one is breastfeeding.
Mm-hmm.
Breastfeeding is a mammalian thing. That's what we're called, mammals, for mammary glands. And breastfeeding is critical for our health and intelligence. Breast milk has thousands of ingredients. It's tailored to the baby as a boy or as a girl. It's different milk. It's tailored for the environment. If there's an infectious agent in the vicinity, the mother's milk will produce an antibody. It's tailored for the growth of that child. If the child's in a growth spurt, the milk will have more fat in it. So it's just this magic elixir. We're discovering more and more things about it. It's important to breastfeed exclusively for as long as possible, at least 6 months. And because it provides a biofilm along the digestive tract, keeping out any infectious agents. Once you eat something else, the biofilm is broken, and so the child can get sick. And it's something that a child needs a lot of. Our milk is thin. There's two kinds, thick and thin. Predators have thick milk so that the baby can stay alone, the offspring can stay alone for a few hours while the mother is going off to get some food. But our milk is thin, so we're supposed to be ingesting it a newborn every 20 minutes or so. It's got the kinds of biochemistry that washes the brain and the body with the right chemical bath for optimal growth. So you want to have it frequently. And it's something that we're supposed to have on average, according to all these studies around the world, 4 years.
Wow.
That's a shocker. That's the average age of weaning. That means it goes on in some of these societies longer than that.
So what would be, if 4 years is the average, what is the range there?
Well, it's the anthropologists say from 2 to 8. There's only one society with 2 years. But 8 was observed. But there is a book called Breastfeeding Older Children that documents she solicited information from around the world voluntarily and she documented them till age 11.
Wow.
Yeah, I've heard other numbers higher.
Gosh. So you said two was only recorded in one society. So that's breastfeeding on demand for an absolute bare minimum of 2 years.
That's right.
Wow.
I know. It's like, I can't believe it. What? But if you were evolved and you lived in these societies, it's pleasurable. You like to be with the child. You love to carry the child around. Everyone wants to play with the child or carry them or be with them. And breastfeeding is a pleasure because you do it with other mothers. You're not alone. You're not isolated. It's a social activity. Even other mothers will breastfeed your child if needed.
Oh, that would make things so much easier. Yeah. So could we talk then about birth spacing in nomadic foraging communities and how that relates to breastfeeding?
Yes, there's documentation that they tend to have 4 years apart.
Mm-hmm.
So in some societies, they just won't have sexual relations while the child is still nursing.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And the sexual mores are a little looser than ours, so I imagine the father would have some other alternatives.
Right, yeah.
The mother is focused on that child often and enjoying it immensely, right? So she's getting a lot of her needs met and her health boosted by nursing. So
yeah, of course.
Yeah.
On the topic of breastfeeding, I wanted to ask you about nipple substitutes, thumbs and pacifiers, because I heard that thumb sucking and the use of pacifiers is unheard of in small band hunter-gatherer societies. Is that true?
Yeah, right, because the mother's breast is handy or someone else's.
Of course, yeah.
I mean, you're not doing other things. You're just hanging out with each other. You go off and get some, gather some food once in a while on your own or with a group, or the men go off and hunt. Little animals are hunted by everybody, and I mean, it's just a loose kind of enjoyable. It's like our vacations in comparison. But they're used to living outside and being very aware of the predators and when they're hungry and paying attention to things, and they're much more amenable to living with animals of various kinds, insects and things. So it's just not attractive to us because we've learned to isolate ourselves inside built environments with no other animals around except the ones we pick, our pets. So it's quite different. But you don't feel alone in those societies. You're always with other people or in the natural world where you very much feel connected, part of the world.
It's beautiful, isn't it? I'd love to live like that.
Yeah. Then we have social support. That would be especially for mom. So we evolved. Sarah Hrdy, Hrdy, anthropologist, has written about this, several books. One is Mothers and Others. But she describes our heritage as cooperative breeders, cooperative child raisers, essentially. So we never did it alone in our ancestral context. We always did it with others, making it very pleasurable. There's a recent study, by the way, on parents versus non-parents and who was happier around the world. And they found that the non-parents were happier, except in a couple places. One of them, Portugal.
Oh, really? Interesting.
Yeah, that parents were happier in Portugal. And they looked into it, and it turns out they have extended family support.
Ah, right, yeah.
We call that allo mothers. The anthropologists call it allo mothers. Sometimes we say in my lab allo parents. And these people then provide responsiveness and affection and other things the child needs as well. So they are forming a social support system for the mother and for the child. And the mother is going to be more responsive when she feels the community is supportive of her and her child.
Of course. Is there an average number of allo parents? I assume 2 is not enough.
Oh, you mean 2 meaning other than mother?
Other than the mother and the father, or a mother and a grandma, or anything else?
Yeah, usually there's a mother, father, and grandmother. At least 3 is usually what happens. And then, it varies with the child's age. So in the early years and months, it'll be mom, dad, grandma, and then it expands to the community.
Right, yeah.
And who the child gets along with better, who likes the child better, they'll hang out with them more. And so after, I'm trying to think of the percentage, but the anthropologists have noted that after a few months, half the time it's not the mom that's hanging out with the child, it's someone else.
Oh, wow. So how frequently would an adult need to be in a child's life to be classified as an adult, as an allo parent?
I don't know if anyone specified that. It has more to do with responsiveness.
Okay.
So do they have a good relationship with the child? So you might only see them once a month or once a year. Well, once a year is not really good enough, but once a month, and you're responsive and you play with them and you feel connected. The child feels loved and cared for and appreciated. Then that's an allo parent.
Okay, yeah, wonderful. Okay, so it seems to me that in order to be an appropriate allo parent, they would need to know, understand, and actively practice these components of the evolved nest.
Yes.
So this would pose like a modern day dilemma that even if a child is fortunate enough to be surrounded by several supportive adults, they will likely be exposed to anxious warnings such as don't let a child play near water or up high or use knives. Or so this would be a result of the the undercare of those adults. Would that be right?
Well, we live in different times now, so there are a lot more dangers, that we've created, other than what's in the natural world. There's a great video by Jean Liedloff, where she talks about how she came about to write her book, The Continuum Concept.
Oh, yes.
And she talks about this over-controllingness that's in the industrialized world, where you can't let the child, you're worried you can't have a hole out in the yard and a toddler. You think the toddler won't be smart enough to avoid falling in, right? That kind of thing. And a student told me about her friend who was in Africa, in an African village someplace, sitting around the fire, and a little kid came up and was starting to put their hand in the fire, and the American slapped the child's hand away, and the elder that was sitting there shook her head and said, "Oh, if you do that, you're going to have to do it their whole life." And that's what we expect now. So we've undermined the confidence of babies and young children, and so they don't learn as they would normally to be careful. Because just like any other, you watch the squirrels, right? You watch any animal, they don't fall off the tree.
No, yeah.
They know how to get around. I mean, that's just what's part of built in to learn your environment. Accidents happen, of course. And then that's what's enhanced in our minds. We've all gotten stress reactive about all the sorts of things, and that's one of them. And so we try to protect the kids, and then forever after, they don't have much confidence, and they do mess things up because they didn't get enough practice.
Right, yeah. My understanding of allo parenting is that the mother is still the dominant care provider. I think I read somewhere that the mother and the baby are in direct physical contact for maybe 90% of the time, and that even if a baby is with an allo parent, the mother is likely only meters away.
Yes.
I have friends who have complained about relatives who will hold on to their baby while it is crying and they won't give it back to its mother. Either they'll try to comfort the baby themselves, or they'll say that it's fine for them to cry a little bit. Could you talk about that relationship between allo parenting and maternal primacy?
Well, this is a bit controversial. Alan Shore says the mother is primary. But developmental psychologists say you can be attached to multiple people. Well, it's true. But he always says the mother's primary for development of the self and the good neurobiology and good mental health. So I don't know where this falls, but I think in our ancestral context, the mother is around. The baby might be in someone else's arms, but the baby's only going to be with someone who's responsive. And everyone's responsive there, generally, unless they've been taken away somehow and gone to a hospital setting or some interference. It's just the nature of being a human in those circumstances. So then what allo parents also provide is playmates. So children need playmates, and they're actually expecting to play throughout childhood. And that's our heritage. Children playing, not sitting in school and looking at books. They're supposed to be running around climbing trees, exploring the river, having experiences in all sorts of games. And this is with multiple age playmates, so not same age kids. Put kids in the same age group and you don't learn much. So what can you learn from your peer who knows not as much as you do? Not much.
Equally as clueless.
Yeah, equally clueless. And so you turn into competitors instead of cooperators. Yeah, so that's unnatural pedagogy. Natural pedagogy is you're in a mixed age group, you learn from the older kids. They love to teach the younger kids or, model, whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
And you're playing and you're out in the natural world. So the natural world is a really important part now that we're missing so much in the industrialized world. Kids don't get to go outside because their parents are so anxious. They think they're going to get kidnapped if they let them out in the yard. So you hardly see kids outside anymore here. And then you've got the screenplay, right? Video games and everything.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we're undermining nature connection, which is a huge problem because as people have realized, it's not enough to know that we should be caring for the environment this way or that way. It's not working because we know a lot and it's still getting much worse. We have to be connected. We have to feel attached. We have to feel what's called nature connected instead of having a nature deficit disorder. And so it's really critical now to help children get connected. And again, it has to be in their own free way, free play, self-directed play, not adult organized play, not the adults keeping watch all the time. Let them get hurt a little bit, right? That's just what you need to do to grow up and to learn. It's really hard for parents because we've got generations of increasing anxiety built into our neurobiology of the parents, right?
Yeah.
Then another one is, I think this is the last, is on a positive climate for that child, to be immersed in a social environment that promotes joy, serenity, enthusiasm, all the positive kinds of emotions, where they feel like they belong, they're appreciated, they're wanted, they're free, they're a community member. That's important part of the community. There was an NPR, National Public Radio, story about how to raise a human. They had a series. And they went to Mexico and talked to a Mayan family mother. And she had 3 kids or something. And they said, "Oh, don't you feel stressed as a mother?" And she said, "Stressed? What's that?" And so they pointed out in this story that in those contexts and in our ancestral context, children are allowed to help as they want to. And so you got a 1.5-year-old trying to sweep the floor or something.
That reminds me of something I once heard about how a 3-year-old who is not very good at cleaning a toilet, but a 3.5-year-old who has had 6 months of practice is pretty good. And as long as the child has autonomy over that choice, so it stays a fun game for the child to do rather than a chore they're obligated to do, then they'll keep that sense of free-spirited helpfulness, which seems like a good segue for you to talk about autonomy.
Well, that comes after early babyhood. It's when the child starts walking around and crawling around that they need to have their freedom and not be curtailed. Yeah.
So with regards to autonomy, my understanding is somewhat cloudy. How does autonomy work in relation to something like a child who doesn't want their hair brushed? Okay, so if their answer is always going to be no, then that's fine. But if you want to try to gently reason with them, are you taking away from their autonomy?
Not necessarily, but I wouldn't pressure them to do something they don't want to do. I mean, you try to persuade them, but they should have a say over how their body is, right? How they are. And with time, and they at age 1.5, 2, they're testing their own powers out. And so you want to put them in environments where they can do this safely and not try to thwart it.
Mm-hmm. See, I saw a documentary a few years ago about families who give their children full and complete autonomy, although now I'm not sure whether they were providing any other aspects of the evolved nest. That these children, they lived, like many people do, in houses with an abundance of unnatural light, so their circadian rhythms were all messed up. So therefore it was midnight and the children were up eating ice cream. So how does respect for a child's autonomy work in a situation such as this that is so far removed from their evolved environment?
Yeah, it's a tough one. So we do have to realize that there are circles of the nest. We're talking about really adult-child relations here. But you have to realize that the natural world is also part of the nest. And so having the sunlight and having experiences outdoors is part of the nest as well. It's not what people usually focus on, and that's not what we study so much in our lab either. But circadian rhythm aspects and providing breast milk at night, which gives the tryptophan, which is the precursor of serotonin, it makes you sleepy. And there's so many things that are interacting here that we have to pay attention to as well. We're just talking about sort of the human to human piece mostly here.
One of your previous careers was as a teacher. So I'm curious, do you think it's possible at all for a child to have autonomy in a domestic environment as restrictive as a school?
Depends on the school. There are some schools where there is a lot of autonomy. Perhaps the most famous one is Summerhill in Britain. But there's Sudbury on the East Coast in the United States. Montessori schools are a little bit better. Waldorf schools, where they pay attention to the uniqueness of that child and let the child have a lot of say. Finnish schools are really very good at this too. They allow the child to select how they're going to move through the school curricula, and they don't test them until they're in high school, typically anyway. And they're all concerned about the child being happy.
What else should you be concerned about? But yeah.
Well, in the States, they're concerned about test scores.
Yeah. Okay, so with regards to these components of the evolved nest, how do you respond to criticism such as my parents didn't do that and look at me now, or I didn't do that to my kids and they turned out fine?
Yeah, those are easy comebacks, I think, because we're all here. We're all existing in this particular society. Another one is, well, look at how many people there are. Isn't this great? We haven't been providing the nest, but there's billions of us. But that's not evolutionary success. Evolutionary success is actually you have to outcompete your rivals over generations, and these people we are killing off our germlines now, in the States anyway, because people are dying young from adverse childhood experiences. We need our grandparents to take care of our young children, and the grandparents are sickly and dying young, and I mean it's just going downhill. So this is not we're acting more like an invasive species, which flourishes for a while until a more cooperative species comes in and can fit into the biocommunity. So we're destroying, kind of wrecking the biosystems, ecological systems wherever we go now, because there's too many of us and we're too destructive and unconscious about what we're doing. So a part of our heritage is to be really attuned into the natural world and the natural ways, and we've lost that in part because we haven't provided the nest. The nest fosters the right hemisphere in early life. It's scheduled to grow more rapidly then, and it's the capacity it has governs the capacity for higher consciousness, for empathy, for self-control, all the things we see missing now in many people. And so this is our demise, essentially. So people say, well, I'm fine. Well, are you? If you knew what your human potential was, which we can see in the small band hunter-gatherers societies that have been studied, they have great, unbelievable perception and awareness of things and hearing and sight. There's one study, somehow they got to do this, of 9 months of breastfeeding versus 9 months of formula, and the children could see better.
Wow.
Breast milk. And that's just one thing they looked at, right? And nobody ever does 4 years of breast milk versus 4 years of other food, right? Because we can't set up those kinds of experiments. It's usually 3 months and 3 months, 3 months of formula, 3 months of breast milk. And yet breast milk has all these wonderful advantages just with those 3 months, or even trying it once. It's better in the studies. So I think people are just, what I talk about is slippage in baselines. Our baselines for what children should be provided have diminished and slipped. We try to minimize what we give babies. Oh, she'll be fine. Just, give her the minimum to keep her alive, essentially. People forget that we're social mammals and we tend to treat kids like they're plants or something. You just need a little warmth and a little food, not play or affection or love or, intersubjectivity, that mind melding of shared expectations and emotions and communication. And they don't know what they missed. And then they don't know that they're missing almost like half their capacities. They can't communicate with the natural world, unlike our cousins, our ancestors who knew how to live sustainably with the natural world, could, attune to the needs of the trees, the plants, the rivers, the animals around them, and keep them flourishing. That's our heritage, is to live like that. And so now we've decided, or we've slipped into thinking that it's normal for children to be aggressive and selfish, adults to be kind of self-centered and not very well. And we think it's normal now. All these things are spiraling to create cultures that are distracted, disconnected, competitive. That's all very weird for an earth creature. No other earth creature does such strange things. So I attribute at least the seeds of it to the evolved nest and our lack of provision of giving people what they need. They're meeting their basic needs actually throughout life, but especially in the early years.
See, my next question was to ask you what the results are of undercare in an adult, but did you have any more to add there? Or?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, the other thing that's happening, I think, that's I'm just starting to get into, is this kind of fever that seems to have taken over civilization in the last, gotten worse and worse over the last thousands of years, but then the last 100 years especially, which is called wetico in Native American terminology. And it's a fever of greed and ruthlessness, exploitation of the life of others. And you can see how it came to the Americas, where they just couldn't see the paradise that they faced with. You could smell the blossoms miles off the coast, hear the birds. There were billions of birds and billions of bison, and the greed and desire to control and make money just wiped out everything. They came from Europe, a lot of these people, because they had been displaced by the wealthy taking over the common lands in the 16th century. And so they're displaced, and they became, according to Karl Polanyi, who's written about this, calls it the Great Transformation. They became wantons. They became just spiritless wanderers with no self-control and no sense of connection, coming to the United States and then acting as if everything's dead. I mean, this is part of the shift, and since the 16th century, treating nature as dead and inert. And so this kind of fever of kind of like delusional fever is what I'm studying right now. But anyway, that's part of our problem too. So what happens when you're overstressed in early life is it leaves you vulnerable to that fever. What do you feel connected to? Nothing. Your teddy bear, right? Because you were sent to your room alone. Things. You start to collect things to make yourself feel better. And then little by little, you slip into this, well, more things are better, right? Hoarding things is better. Having more than the others is better. Having more. And that's this insatiable appetite. The Asian cultures call it hungry ghosts. And then you haven't developed your sense of self because it was broken early on. You never develop your intuition, your sense of connection to everything, which is what we are. Our quantum mechanics tells us we're all connected in this web, and we're influencing everything else with our thoughts and perspective and how we look at it, and everything's dynamic and dynamically in flux. Native Americans knew this, and indigenous people knew this already centuries ago, and we used to know this in the West, but it all got, civilization kind of wiped us out. And so now we got the fever going on, so we're destroying the planet, we're going over the cliff, and people still go on as if there's more to have. There's not much left. So that's what happens to the adults.
Wow. Okay, so having said all of this, I want to give you a chance to help emphasize that we're not by any means guilting or shaming parents. Personally, I don't think I know anyone who is fulfilling every single component of the evolved nest. Naturally, I think of my own childhood with two parents who did and still do love me very much. My mum has said herself, knowing all of this now, she wishes she could go back and do things differently. And most of what she learned came from her own mother, who had 6 children and 20-something grandchildren. And on her gravestone, they wrote how she did treasure the babe on her knee and the warm, sweet kiss of a child. So I really want to stress that not fulfilling all of the components does not mean someone doesn't love their child or is a bad parent. Our estrangement from the evolved nest has been going on for hundreds, even thousands of years. So many generations who love their children and genuinely believe they are doing what's best for their child. Do you have something to add to this?
No, that's a beautiful statement.
Okay, thank you.
I think we have to remember that it's a community responsibility. It's not a parent responsibility alone. It's the community who provides the support for all these things. And when the community is distracted and destructive or cruel, you can't expect parents to be able to manage on their own. So it's not a parent fault thing. It's not mother's fault, father's fault. It's the community. And so we all have responsibility here.
Oh, I like that. Thank you. Okay, a fully actualized person who has received all of the components of the evolved nest. What does this look like?
So we can see this in the small band hunter-gatherers, that they are very calm as adults, very cooperative and generous, high autonomy. They go and do what they want, but they also have a sense of connection to the natural world, to other humans. They're very cooperative. And they're also tuned in. So you can see a lot of the way of being in Native American writing in among the elders and what they write about, and the awareness of the importance of how you treat everyone in the moment, how you treat the natural world in the moment. They also emphasize virtue. So virtue is part of how you survive in our ancestral context. If you weren't a good person, if you weren't cooperative and tuned in to being with others in a relationally attuned way, so egalitarian way, you wouldn't survive probably. And in these societies, they're fiercely egalitarian, so they don't boss people around, not even the kids. They're not coerced. That's a sign, it's a cause for breaking a relationship. And the adults think that you can harm a child when you interfere. And so in the Native American societies, you let the child grow as they will. You guide them when they need it, or see what they like to do, what they're good at, and then help them, give them mentoring of various kinds. You also provide lots of stories and narratives that help them feel connected to the landscape where you are. So if you're with a lot of beavers around, you tell stories about beavers and how beavers are people, and you have to respect them in different ways. There's all sorts of tales of these things. So this becomes part of who you are, is this nest of not only all the supportive systems we talked about for young children, but throughout your life, you are participating in stories and rituals, in singing and dancing and playing in a way that keeps you tuned up to being cooperative. It keeps you tuned into the community. And when there's something that goes wrong, perhaps a teenager steals a bottle of whiskey or something from someone's house, the healing practices move in. So you have healing circles to talk. Well, how did you feel? What damage did you do? Look, that action created all sorts of distrust in the neighborhood. Distrust of teens, distrust of having things stolen by strangers or even neighbors or something. And so there's all sorts of circles of healing that go on, and it takes time to do this. And there's patience about it, and not set rules that we have relied on. So it happens when you don't have this kind of dynamic way of growing up. You got to have all these external rules that tell you what to do, because you're sort of dysregulated, and you just do things impulsively and selfishly because you didn't get the good neurobiological structures set up, and you need sanctions, at least and that's what we see in the States, especially. So much punishment going on, not understanding how humans really develop well. So you undermine virtue and become vicious, and have all sorts of vicious people everywhere. It spirals out of control like it is now. But the good, the good role models for how to be are to be aiming for wisdom. Wisdom is a matter of manner. It's a mindset. It's the way you are in the moment. Are you able to be fully emotionally present with the person you're with? Are you able to pay attention to the web of life, the circles of life that keep you nourished, that you rely on Mother Earth, that you rely on the air and the sun, clean water, and keep that in mind as you make decisions and take actions, to keep those things flourishing as well, to make sure that you're enhancing the life of everyone around you and everything around you rather than diminishing it. So it's the opposite of this virus, this Wedico fever that we've got going on right now.
That's beautiful. Thank you. What is a major misconception that you think people have about the evolved nest?
I guess in the States, the major misconception is it doesn't matter.
Mm-hmm.
That children just have to. So it stems from the emphasis on splitting mind from body, mind, body, and spirit all split into pieces. And so there's a lack of awareness that the neurobiology of those early years and how you're shaping it actually shapes the spirit and mind of that child. People tend to think that comes later, that morality and being virtuous is all about what's in your head. You make a good decision, and then you make your body do it, right? In the spirit thing, we don't talk about that. So in our ancestral context, it's all united, it's all integrated, it all is mutually shaping, mutually co-acting.
Mm-hmm. What do you think could be changed at a large sort of level to make the evolved nest more widely practiced and socially acceptable, even though it should be the natural norm?
Well, we have a super problem in the States because we don't have parental leave at all, no paid parental leave. So that undermines the nest already. So then parents have to rationalize why it's okay to send their babies to daycare, why it's okay to practice sleep training when they're 6 weeks old, why it's okay to give them formula. And so then they start to enhance all those things as good, even though they're contrary to our species typical nest. So we need paid parental leave for at least a year, ideally 3, diminishing whatever pay or whatever that would be. We need to organize communities around families and children rather than around corporate money making. We need to pay attention also to all the toxins in the environment that are also undermining our neurobiological development. There's one study that showed that exposures, I think it was to BPA, bisphenol A, plastic, actually undermines sociality, interest in being with others in the subsequent generation. So we are loaded now, our bodies are loaded with plastics and other toxins from our drinking out of plastic bottles and breathing the air and playing on computers and then eating. things like that. So all those things are kind of pushing us also in this direction of self-centeredness. So we also, I think, need to pay attention to the media and what kinds of experiences we put ourselves in. We know that your expertise, how you become good at something, is partially how you focus on it, practice and practice, but a lot of what you become is implicit. It happens subconsciously. It happens without intention. It's from the environments you put yourself in. Aristotle pointed out that you needed a mentor until you could mentor yourself, which would be about age 30.
Wow.
And a mentor guides you in selecting friendships, activities, environments for you to tune up your intuitions, your sensibilities, your emotions. The nest provides what's needed to shape our emotion systems that we're born with in the right direction. You can condition up fear and anger and rage and panic, which not providing the nest does. Then what happens is that brain that's easily stress reactive will react more easily and see threat more easily than a well-structured brain. And when that happens, the stress response actually moves blood flow away from your higher order thinking, and it mobilizes you for action, for running away or fighting. And it's not going to make you open-hearted. So we have to remember that the environments we put ourselves in are shaping our character, that every little action we do is shaping our character. And especially in early life, whatever those environments are for young children are shaping their trajectory for their character. So what kind of character do we want? Do we want the selfish, kind of aggressive kind of character? Is that what we want? Or do we want to have a cooperative, kind of character, one that is insightful, that's perceptive, that's actually communal and attentive to the needs of others? Those are the questions we have to ask ourselves.
So many good answers there. Okay, let's talk about you. What are you currently working on?
Well, I have a book that's coming out in this month from a conference we had a few years ago called Indigenous Sustainable Wisdom. And that's got several Native American writers in it and others, so we hope that will have an impact. I'm also then working on a book on the evolved nest. So how do we get unnested? How do we have so much unnestedness, and trying to trace those roots through history, and then try to alert people to the fact that we are putting our species over the cliff if we don't return to what is species typical for our well-being and the well-being of the earth.
Wow, that sounds like something I really want to read. When do you think that one will be out?
It'll be a while.
Well, I'm looking forward to it. So this other one, it comes out this month, which is April.
Yes.
And at the time I release this episode, it will be the end of May. So it will have already been out for nearly 2 months. Cool. Okay. And where can people buy it? Where would you like people to buy it?
Well, the publisher is Peter Lang.
Mm-hmm.
So there'll be a paperback and a hardcover, thank goodness.
Oh, good. Which of your other books would you recommend for anyone interested in reading more about what we've discussed today?
Well, the 2014 book, Neurobiology and the Development of Human Morality, is the one that goes through lots of neuroscience. You could skim through that part. It gives you the big picture, though, on all this and what the cycle we're in is and what to do about it, how to heal yourself, how to get back to what I call primal wisdom.
Okay, so I will put links in the show notes to the Evolved Nest website and to your blog with Psychology Today. Where else can people go to learn more or to get in contact with you?
You can give them my email
Mm-hmm.
and my university website, which has a lot of papers and links to blogs, a list of blogs and podcasts and things.
Okay. Darcia, thank you so much for taking the time to come on the show and share this knowledge with us. It has truly been my pleasure to speak with you today. Do you have any final words?
Well, stay hopeful and put your hearts in order. That's what's going to get us to the future, is paying attention to our heart sensibilities. And sometimes that takes a while to to unpack the protected heart from our own bad experiences. And so get the nourishing you need from the people around you. The healers will come if you ask the universe for healing and for help. It will come.
If you enjoyed this episode, you can join the discussions on our Facebook and Instagram pages. To hear more, subscribe for free on the podcast app on your smartphone. We are available on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, and all of your favourite podcast platforms. If you would like to offer feedback or suggest a guest, email us at untaming.podcast@gmail.com.